Ladies and gentlemen, Macabre Derek here, and we are here for another RPG rant. What is this rant about? Well, actually, it's quite simple. Dragonborn. Now, why is Derek talking about Dragonborn? When has he even mentioned this in a previous video? Well, we're going to be talking about him now, and it's specifically because a fellow player of mine has kind of just got into the whole thing, and I wanted to end up giving them my thoughts upon a particular race that they wanted to imbibe. Now, what are Dragonborn? Effectively, they're a race that shares a lineage, much like the additional tiefling or the half-orc or the half-elf before it. It ends up sharing a blood type with something that's come before. In this case, dragons. Now, for those of you who may not have given it much thought, most people end up assuming that dragons and Dungeons and Dragons are, well, just big flying lizards. What's there to know, Derek? Well, actually, there's a fair amount to know. In several lores, dragons are akin to demigods. That's right. They are one step below those who have actually controlled the very elemental forces of the world. Very little can contend with a dragon, especially an ancient dragon. Something that's been around for a long time, has seen some shit. And this individual, this creature, is something you share historical lineage with. Now, a Dragonborn is, to my understanding, born of a clutch. It's very, very close to clan at all time. Consider that for a second. You were born inherently as a group. You have many brothers and sisters at any given time. And if that's not worrying enough, your inclinations as far as good, evil, chaotic, neutral, lawful, or whatever, well, they typically go to extremes. How extreme, you might ask? Well, inherently in a tiefling's blood, they have a physical scar of sort, the horns, the red skin, the pupilless eyes. That ends up changing it so that they understand they descend from demons and devils. A curse has been placed upon their family, and it follows through the blood time and time again. What is different about this? Well, the core thing that's different about this is that it's tieflings have a choice. They can choose to fight against what they are. Dragonborn, on the other hand, knows nothing but. It is actually born within its veins this eternal struggle between good and evil. The chromatic versus the metallic. The two dragon types often fall into these categories. Oftentimes going between Behemoth and Tiamat. Tiamat being a whole bunch of chromatic dragons, your classic red dragon, your blue dragon, green dragon, black dragon being a personal favorite of mine. And you got your bronze, copper, gold, silver, all that fun stuff. Of course, I skipped a few, but that's okay. Everybody gets the short end of the stick once in a while. So what does this have to do with Dragonborn? Well, Dragonborn also fall in these colors, also fall on one side or another of this war that has been going on throughout the eternities, throughout the planes. There will always be this notion, this need for good and evil. And this is what you are. You are a physical embodiment of this concept. You are eternal and forced into mortal shell and then given mortal context. But inevitably, the blood will always call to you to be what your ancestor inherently was. Every dragon has these moments where they are purely benevolent, wise, creative, or maybe tyrannical, horrifying, disruptive, agents of chaos and destruction. Some are sinister, some are gentle. And each dragon has this within them. And in doing so, they also have a touch of something inside them. The breath weapon, for instance, often is very, very telling. Personal favorite of mine is the black dragon, a creature that lurks in fetid swamps and old pools, marshes, and such. Why would it end up lurking there where things rot? It is not a creature of death. Despite the fact it wears a skull, you got to think about this. A swamp is something that will teem with some of the most life you will find in a given area, more than any forest, that's for sure. Because in there, it becomes predator eating prey, particularly the nature of ambush predators. So, black dragonborn, one that has those scales polished to a mere shine in vanity. And chromatic dragons can be very vain, so expect your chromatic dragon to be so. And think of themselves as higher. Will very oftentimes take on that same methodology. It's something that just comes naturally to them. Yeah, sure, they're evil. They're horrible things. They should be feared. But expect a black dragon to be more akin to a rogue than you would find, say, a red dragon, which is more akin to a barbarian or warrior. Blue dragons I would often consider maybe sorcerers of sorts. You can end up finding every dragon has a distinct personality type. Gold. Oh, you better believe that gold is going to be a paladin or a cleric, a spiritual leader, and an apex champion of good. These concepts are very important to a dragon, and more so with a dragonborn, because a dragon can always, just by sheer might, declare this is the way. Dragonborn is amongst mortals, and despite the fact that Dragonborn are most definitely not immortal, but they do have that legacy to consider. And as I said earlier, the breath weapon. Now, what about the breath weapon? The breath weapon is not just something to attack. You got to think about its other uses. This is your new arm. This is something you lived with day to day. Dragonborn did not become hatched and then immediately started using its breath weapon just to attack, especially if you are of the metallic variety. No, you might have found other uses for it, so get creative, right? Maybe one who, simple background, a chef of some sort. Sounds odd, really. Yeah, it can be. But then again, Dragonborns find themselves in odd places. Don't be surprised if a chromatic dragon, or pardon, a metallic Dragonborn finds itself aiding out the poor, cooking for them, trying to do right by the world. It doesn't need to be a huge adventurer, but it knows its lineage. It knows that those small good deeds are pebbles, ripples in the water. Then once they reach the shore, they create more ripples, and then more and more, and they spread outward. So they don't end up. They don't always need to be grandiose, but they do know that they are higher. Every dragon has a little bit of vanity in it, and it's understandable. I mean, again, you are second only to gods. And if you are descended by something that is second only to the gods, where does that put you? For chromatic dragons, this turns into looking at everything else as weaker, as something that is to be conquered at the very least, to be destroyed or cast aside, probably, or at least used for your own amusement. No sense letting a pauper go to waste. Or maybe he decides that he is worthy of tribute to mirror that of his ancestor, that white dragon that had the frozen hoard of gold and treasures in ice, creating the entire wall of his cave. He loved the sparkle of frost and gold and silver, and just watching it reflect and refract light all through that cave. And maybe he wants to mirror that. Maybe it's a gold dragon whose hoard is not necessarily something hidden in a mountaintop kind of situation, but instead his hoard is the village, is the city he protects. That is his hoard. People are his hoard. Their lives are what's valuable, and the recognition and admiration he gains from it. And what if you descended from such a creature and you try and live up to that? Would you then take up the sword? Would you then defend the weak and stand righteous? Because legacy is very important. Clan is important. Because you don't have much else in that regard. There's not much for culture detailed in the player's handbook. If you actually take a look through this thing, it doesn't actually tell you a whole lot. I think that's actually the sad state of Dragonborn, because they are, in my mind, a very missed opportunity. Because this is what you're going to need to reference if you want to have a shot of playing a Dragonborn with something a little bit more robust, or with a little more gravitas, I should say. Dragonborn are, in fact, a sliver of lineage of a dragon. And if you ever stop to really think what that means, that's why I emphasize a dragon's position so much. If you knew you descended from that kind of greatness, how would it change you? Consider that. Maybe it's an arrogance that your character would end up considering, that I am Dragonborn, ergo I am fit to rule, I am fit to conquer, I deserve these riches and these spoils. Maybe I'll become a great warlord, or perhaps a priest of a high god, and lead the faithful. I'm going to flip through one last little bit. We're just going to skip to a dragon. Random dragon. So, what could be fun? Ancient white dragon. That sounds good. So, let's read on the white dragon. The smallest, least intelligent, and most animalistic of chromatic dragons, white dragons dwell in frigid climates, favoring Arctic areas and icy mountains. They are vicious, cruel reptiles, driven by hunger and greed. As feral eyes, a sleek profile, a spined crest. The scales of a wormling white dragon glisten pure white. As the dragon ages, its sheen disappears and some of its scales begin to darken. It's primal and vengeful. They're lone masters. They avoid all other dragons. Treasure under ice. I think I mentioned that already. You learn about this. You read it and you go, that influence, that blood does not define your character. You absolutely must be that. but it's something your character will be gravitating to, or perhaps fighting against, much like a tiefling in that regard. Nevertheless, your legacy says you are caught up in the middle of this struggle between good and evil. So ask yourself, on what side of the line would your Dragonborn stand? And is it worth the fight to begin with?